Hi there, my name is Katie and welcome to this presentation on non-verbal reasoning tests. Now this will include what they are, how to pass them, and show you example questions to aid you during your preparation stages of your assessment. Now during this presentation I'm going to discuss some of the key tips and strategies that you can use which will allow you to improve your performance in any test. Now, as I go through this presentation, make sure that you have with you a pen and a blank piece of paper, as I will discuss lots of important tips and examples that you should write down in order to understand the expectations required. Now, during the video, I will also tell you how you can get free access to hundreds of test questions to help you prepare, so stick around to find out more. Okay, so let's get straight into it. So the first thing that we need to do is ask ourselves, what is non-verbal reasoning? Now, there is no point undergoing a test if you do not know what it involves. So basically, non-verbal reasoning can be defined as a type of psychometric assessment that requires logical and technical ability to visualize patterns, shapes, and formations. So an example of this might be, you might be given a question based on a sequence of shapes, and within that sequence there a diagram will be an odd one out, and you will have to work out what diagram is the odd one out. Now the odd one out could be a result of anything. It could be that the colours have changed, or a shape has been reflected or rotated, the number of shapes or sizes is different. Therefore, it is important that you are able to visualise what is going on in order to work out the correct answer. Now, non-verbal reasoning come in many different formats and they use different styles of questions. Now, these questions are either described as being abstract, diagrammatic, or spatial. However, a key tip that you should write down and remember is that all of these types of questions rely on similar skills and qualities. So when it comes to practicing, I would advise that you practice them all in order to enhance your performance. Now, at the end of this presentation, we will show you a direct link to our How to Become guide, which will include an array of different types of non-verbal reasoning questions that you can use to practice to improve your scores. But within this presentation, I will focus specifically on the basics of the common types of questions that you are likely to face, as focusing on the basics is crucial to master these types of questions before increasing the level of difficulty. Now, the types of questions that you will need to answer may include all or some of the following as shown here. So here we have questions on 2D views of 3D shapes, identical shapes, rotating shapes, reflections of shapes, finding the odd shape, finding the missing shape, and symmetrical shapes. Now, this list is clearly not extensive and therefore other questions may crop up. However, this should not matter. If you've practiced different styles of non-verbal reasoning questions, there is no reason that you can't successfully pass any non-verbal reasoning test. So before we move on to practicing some sample questions, let's quickly take a look at some of the key tips or ways in which you can master your non-verbal reasoning tests. So firstly, and you should write this down guys, is that if you are serious about successfully passing your test, you will need to undergo as much practice as you possibly can. Now you can do this by downloading a copy of our How to Become guide now, which will enable you to practice hundreds of testing questions. Remember, practice is key, and the more that you practice, the better chances of success. So it will also help to find out whether the test will be conducted under any time limits. Now, most recruiters will use a time limit to determine how well you perform under pressure. Now, when it comes to preparing, I suggest that you practice both under time limits and under no time limits. But I suggest that you practice with no time limits first to familiarise yourself with the test, and then practice under the same time conditions that you can expect in your assessment. Now, employers will want to see that you can work both effectively and quickly. In order to improve your timing skills, you will need to better your performance in your assessment. Now, another key tip which you should write down is to find out whether your test will deduct marks for any incorrect answers. Now, some tests will deduct marks for incorrect answers, so I would avoid any wild guessing unless unless, however, you know for 100% that your test does not deduct marks, in which case you have nothing to lose. So we have touched upon this point previously, but make sure that you aim for speed as well as accuracy. Now, not only are employers seeking candidates who show strong levels of ability and accuracy, but they also want candidates who possess strong levels of proficiency and speed. Now, generally, this is why these types of tests are conducted under time limits, to ensure that candidates show the correct qualities in which the employer is looking for. Now, another type of tip that you should write down is to not waste time on one particular question. Now, you may find one type of question more difficult than the others, in which case you should just move on and come back to it at the end if you do have time. So your time is precious in these sorts of tests, and therefore you do not have the time to ponder over just one type of question. So just move on and come to it at the end if you do have time. So finally, and one of the most important tips in regards to any non-verbal reasoning test, is to eliminate the most obscure answers. Now, this tip can be used for pretty much any type of question in any non-verbal reasoning assessment. Usually, a non-verbal reasoning comprises of multiple choice answers and therefore allows you to eliminate answers simply by ruling them out. Now, using the process of elimination, this will save you time and allow you to work more coherently through the assessment. So now that we have a general understanding of what non-verbal reasoning tests are and how you can improve your performance, let's move on to the first sample question. Now, as you can see in this type of question, it refers to 2D views of 3D shapes. So the question is asking you to work out which figure is a top-down 2D view of the 3D shape. So here, as you can see, there we have the 3D shape and 4 answer choices in which to choose from. So imagine that you are a bird overlooking everything. What would you see if you were looking down on this shape? So let's work through the tip of process of elimination. So the red circle here indicates the part that you need to be focusing on, and you know that there should be 1, 2, 3, 4 squares that you would see if you were to look down on the object. So therefore, we can automatically rule out answer A because this has 5 squares and you know that it should have only 4. Again, you can rule out answer C and D because again, they should contain 4 squares, and therefore you have eliminated 3 of the 4 options, and therefore you know that the correct answer is B. So this sample question is pretty basic, and some questions like this will involve more squares in a range of different positions, which will make it harder to determine the correct answer. However, using the same process as we have just used here means that you'll be able to work out any level of difficulty through process of elimination and ruling out the most obscure answers and focusing on the shape by imagining that you are a bird overlooking everything from above. Okay, so let's move on to another type of question. So this question is complete the pair, and the question asks you to look at the figure changes from box 1 to box 2 and apply these changes from box 3 to box 4 in order to get the correct answer. So in simple terms, whatever happens in box 1 to box 2 will need to happen in box 3 to get to box 4. Now, a top tip for this type of question is to only focus on one particular element of the diagram. So let's pay attention to this box here. Now you can see that there's one vertical line. So if we look in the second box and see how this has changed, you can see that this is now doubled. So therefore you know that this box in box 3, if it has 3 lines, you know that this should have 6. So therefore, you should look at the answer options and see which ones you can rule out. So 1, 2, 3, 4, so you know it's not D. 1, 2, 3, 4, so you know it's not C either. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it could be B because that has 6 lines. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it can't be A because that has 5 and you need 6. So therefore, again, we have eliminated the answers, and now for and therefore we know that the correct answer is B. Okay, so the next type of question is to connect the shapes. So basically this question requires you to connect the shapes using the corresponding letters to complete the shape. So here we have 4 shapes in the grey shaded box, and each of these shapes contains letters. So you need to work out what letters need to be joined up together in order to make one of these diagrams shown below. So let's take the first shape. So as you can see that this letter is B. So you need to match it up to this shape here because again this has a B. So you know that this semicircle will be attached to the bottom of this pentagon. So you know it's not A because that there should be at the bottom here. It can't be B because you know that that needs to be at the bottom of the pentagon. Again, C can be ruled out because this needs to be attached to the pentagon and not the triangle. D, it could be D because it is joined to the bottom of here, and it could be E because again it's joined to the bottom. So automatically we have ruled out 3 answers. So therefore we are left with D and E. So let's take another shape. So let's take C here. So you know that this triangle here needs to be connected to the top left side of the pentagon. So if you go from D, you know it's not D now because that triangle there should be where this side is. So therefore we can rule that out, so you know that the correct answer is E. So by eliminating the answers and focusing on one element of the sequence, you have quickly speeded up the process of finding out the correct answer. Okay, so let's move on to the next sample question. So this question here is an odd one out. So the question requires you to work out which figure is the odd one out. So here we have 5 diagrams, A, B, C, D and E. And we know that one of these diagrams is different from the others. Now, anything can be changing in these types of questions, so therefore it requires great attention to detail. So anything can be changing, so positioning, rotation, symmetry, colours, anything. So pay attention to everything. So let's take diagram A. So here we have a black square positioned underneath the black horizontal line and a white square balanced on top of the line. So let's look at diagram B. So if this is the same apart from the square on top is a different colour. So it could be that the colours are changing. But let's move on to diagram C and see if this is correct. So as you can see that the colours are still changing, so it can't be the colours now because they are still changing in each of these diagrams. So if we take diagram E, the red circles show you what is missing. Now on diagrams A, B, C and D, there is a square balanced on top of the horizontal line. So therefore E is the odd one out because the diagram doesn't have a square balanced on the top. Okay, so let's move on to example 5. So this is identical shapes and quite self-explanatory. You need to work out which shape is identical to another. Now, if you read the question carefully, no rotations or reflections are needed. So questions like this are designed to trick you, and all of the answers will look similar at first. So it will make it hard to distinguish the difference between them. So what you need to remember is to break up each element of each shape and work out which ones are identical. Now, this question is quite simple, and you should notice fairly quickly that answer B and answer C are similar. So if you look at them, all the parts in each of them, they are in exactly the same place. So another way that you can work out these types of questions is to automatically eliminate the most obscure answers. So you could have eliminated E because this doesn't look like any of the other diagrams. So this is a fairly basic question, and they will get relatively harder with more shapes and different positionings. So make sure that you pay attention to what is going on in the sequence. Okay, so let's look at example 6. And these questions are based on cubes and nets. Now, cubes and net questions are quite tricky, and at first you might find them relatively more difficult. Now, these questions require you to work out which cube can be made from the net as drawn. So which cube A, B, C or D would be made if you folded each of these lines as shown by the red dots, because that's where you would fold it, would make one of these cubes. So once you've practiced these questions a bit more, they will become relatively easy and you will begin to visualise where the shapes would be positioned. But to begin with, I would suggest, if you find these questions really difficult, is to draw out on a piece of paper the net shown here and cut it out and fold it along the lines of where it is, and therefore you can visually see by folding your own cube of where the shapes would be in order to work out the correct answer. So for this type of question, let's take diagram A and see whether we can make this net here. So if we take this star here, you know that this circle, this black circle here, can be positioned on top because, as you can see in the net, that's there. So it would just need to be rotated 180 degrees in order to get that there. So if you folded that, you should be able to visualize when you become more competent at these type of questions that this one here will become this side here. So in actual fact, the correct answer is A, and we can make sure that this is the correct answer by eliminating these answers. So in answer B, we have the black circle here. So you cannot have this star here with this triangle on top. It just simply would not match. Okay, so diagram C, if you had this black square here, you would not be able to have that black circle on top because, as you can see from the net, this is in a completely different position. So diagram D, if you had that triangle there, you would not be able to have that white star and that black circle next to each other. It just would not work. So we do know in actual fact that the answer is A. Now, as I said before, these questions are quite difficult if you are struggling to visualize these diagrams in your mind. So practicing with drawing out your nets and making the cubes yourself, and the more that you practice, the more easier they will become. Okay, so example 7. So the final type of question that we're going to look at is to complete the sequence. Now this is similar to the question of complete the pair. So basically you got to work out what diagram here, A, B, C or D, would fit in the missing square in order to complete this sequence. So to work out the progression of the sequence, let's look at the relationship between box 1 and box 2. Now box 1 contains 2 brackets, one at the top and one at the bottom, which contains a black square in the middle of each. Well, this then changes to the brackets being moved to the different side, and these black squares here have been removed and replaced with one black square on either of the brackets. So we need to work out how box 3 fits in order to complete the overall sequence. So as you can see, this diagram 4 is closely similar to diagram 2. In actual fact, it is the same. It's just been reflected. So again, these brackets here are the same, and these squares are just on opposite sides. So we can assume that box 3 should look like box 1, because if box 2 looks like box 4, then box 1 should look like box 3. So this red circle here shows you what makes the correct answer. So we know that this box 3 here needs to contain 2 solid black shapes in the middle. So we can rule out A and B because these do not contain 2 black shapes in the middle of the brackets. Now it could be answer C, but then if you look carefully, this black square, that shouldn't be there, so you know that you can automatically rule that out now. So therefore the correct answer would be D. So That completes the example questions, and you should have a better understanding of the types of questions you are likely to face. Now, what you need to do is undergo a prolonged period of preparation and practice to ensure your best performance when it comes to tackling the real assessment. Now remember, as I said at the beginning, you will have to practice lots and lots of sample questions in order to become competent in this area. Now within this guide, it's got hundreds of sample questions for you to work through. The book contains a variety of different types of questions at a variety of difficulty levels. And you can get this book now by going on to Amazon or the How to Become website and search for non-verbal reasoning tests. Now, all that is left for me to do is wish you the very best of luck with your assessment, and thank you for watching.